Good evening, guys. My name is James from VUT. I just wanted to proceed with the class where we left off last week. So just a reminder, for those of you that haven't made your payments yet, please make your payments so that you can join the classes for the year 2 semester 1. Right, so like I said last time, I'll be taking you for management accounting and for business finance. And this is our and management accounting and business law. And this is our second lecture for business law. Right. So I'm gonna just take myself off the video so that I don't distract you. All right. So let's go ahead. So last week when we met, we highlighted that there are 6 units in business law, and currently we are on the first unit, unit number 1, where we are doing the introduction, right? So under the introduction of business law, there are 4 key things that we're going to talk about. The introduction, where we talk about just what business law is all about, right? And then the key concepts, and then the sources of law, and then finally the conclusions. So we have already covered the introduction, where we highlighted why do we need the law, right? Why do we need the law in South Africa, right? And then we also highlighted the history of where does South African law come from? How has it been developed over time, right? And then after we did that, we went through the concepts of business law, the key concepts, where we defined what business law is all about. And I highlighted that there are different aspects of business law, such as commercial law, contract law, and etc., that we are going to have to learn. And then we highlighted that in South Africa, whenever we talk about the law, we need to talk about the government, or we need to talk about the state. And we highlighted that the state is divided into 3 things: the legislature, the executive, and the judicial authority of the nation, right? And then finally, I introduced a concept, that was called the rule of law, where I said the rule of law says that the constitution of the country is the supreme law of the country. Hence, it governs all the relationships that exist within a nation. And we said that there are mainly 2 types of relationships, right? There are private legal relationships and the public legal relationships. And when you say public, we mean your relationship with the government. And when you say private, we mean your relationship with any other person within the country. We say that these relationships, as they exist because of what we call legal objects. Where I said, for example, a property, e.g. my car, is a legal object. And because it is mine by nature, I have certain rights that protect that car so that you may not be able to access it. And these rights, we say that they are real rights and personal rights, where real rights are rights on real property or corporate property, and personal rights are rights to performance. For example, my right to receive a salary at the end of the semester, that is a what? That is a personal right that you have as a what? As an individual, right? And then finally, we said that because there are real rights and personal rights that arise due to legal objects, each and every one of us, at a certain point in time, we can become liable to another person or liable to the state because we have not fulfilled these specific what? These are specific rights at the end of the what? At the end of the day. So those were the what? Those were the key concepts that we are talking about. So that's where we left off last week. So now we want to go into the sources of law, right? We want to go a little bit deeper into how South African law is created, because it's going to be important whenever we discuss different situations, because we want to know how did we arrive at that. So when we talk about the sources of law, these listed here, the Constitution, legislation, judicial precedent, common law, custom law, and foreign law are the key laws within the country. So I've arranged them in the order of their importance, which means that the constitution becomes the supreme law of the country, followed by legislation, followed by judicial precedent, and so forth as it goes down. So now let's go into each and every one of these little things, right? So let's start with the constitution. So the constitution of the country, which was formed in 1996, is the supreme law of this country, which means it governs every single thing that happens in South Africa. Every other law that we have in South Africa is subordinate to the constitution, which means that if we have a law that goes against the spirit and the values and the rights written within the constitution, that law is invalid. So I'm sure you've had cases where someone goes to court and then they lose in court, but then they say, I'll go to the constitutional court. What they're simply saying is that this court, yes, it ruled based on South African law, but this law that they've ruled based on, it does not maintain the spirit of the constitution, or it violates the constitution. And that is why I'm going to go to the constitution so that I can win this particular case. So because of that, the constitution is the one that directs the activities of the government within the country. It provides the limitations that exist in each and every law of the land, or in each and every right that we have as South Africans, right? So when you check the constitution, there are certain laws within the constitution that have got an impact on the businesses that we operate, right? Or that have got an impact on commerce. Not everything will have an impact on commerce, but there are some laws that will have an impact on how we operate as businesses. So for example, number one, there are bills of rights or constitutional issues that have to do with the freedom of trade, the freedom of occupation. It means that you have every right to create any business you want. You have every right to work in any industry you want. You have every right to own property, right? There are laws that have to do with labor relations, assembly issues, of the right to demonstrate, the right to petition something. So all of those things are enshrined within the constitution, and they affect the day-to-day running of a business, because you've got employees in your workplace. They have a right, according to the constitution, to demonstrate if they are not happy with your actions. So you cannot disallow them from demonstrating, because it is their constitutional right. Or for example, there are rights, for example, the right of equality, the right of dignity of life, the right of freedom of speech, the right of privacy, freedom of expression, access to information. All of those things are enshrined again within the constitution, and they are going to affect how you operate your business. Right? For example, the right to equality. You cannot therefore say, I do not want to employ, and maybe say, I do not want to employ Black people at my company. You cannot do that, because Black people under the law, they are equal to white people, they are equal to Indian people, they are equal to every other race that exists within South Africa. So you cannot do that, because they have a right to equality, right? So even, for example, maybe you're a funeral parlor, right? And you are doing in the business of conducting funerals and burying people and whatnot. People have a right to dignity. So the way that your morticians at the funeral parlor conduct themselves when they are cleaning that body, when they are presenting that body, might break the rights of someone in terms of the right to dignity, right? So, or a right to freedom of expression, right? So that is why you can post what you want on Facebook or on something, but your right can also become a problem to someone else at the end of the day. So all of these things are enshrined within the constitution, and they affect how we do business, right? And then also there are some rights that are not very clear, but the rights to education, the rights to housing, the rights to healthcare, and all of those things. So if you are in the business of education, if you're in the business of healthcare, you have to be careful how you present your products and how you sell your products, lest they violate some of the rights that are enshrined within that specific constitution, right? So that's the constitution, right? So that's the supreme law of the country. Let's look at another source of law, which is legislation, right? So when you're looking at legislation, you're now looking at the rules that have been put within the country. So for example, in South Africa, we have got the Criminal Act, we've got the Labor Act, we've got the Municipality Act. All of those are laws or rules that have been put through by the parliament, or that have been put through by the House of Assembly, right, by legislation. So legislation are the binding rules of the whole nation that have been put forward by the parliament of that particular nation. These are put forward because of a couple of reasons. Number one, there's what we call common law. I'm going to explain what common law is. But in order for us not to have troubles, whether this is common law or this is not common law, we put a rule. We put a regulation in place that we can all agree and can all refer back to, i.e. it brings clarity that when it comes to the issue of buying a house, as long as the title deed is in my name, the house belongs to me. Right? So it puts clarity on certain things that are not that are not clear. And it also puts exceptions to certain things that we might think are correct. So for example, there's the issue of ignorance of the law, where someone say, oh, I did not know that that law existed, so I should not be charged according to that law. Under common law, you can talk about that. Right. But under legislation, the legislation will tell you that the ignorance of the law does not exempt you from implementing the law. So that is the reason why we have legislation. Right? It helps us to clarify all of the little nitty-gritty things that we might not be clear about. So whenever we have got an issue as a company, as a business, as an employee, as sole traders, the first thing that we refer to is legislation. You check, okay, so I have a disagreement with my employee. I have to go and check the Labor Act. What does the Labor Act say about this disagreement that I have with him? If the Labor Act says nothing, then we go to the common law. If the Labor Act says something, then that is the law that will govern that specific relationship. So there are two types of legislation. The normal legislation that we know is the one which is passed by parliament. But whenever parliament passes a legislation, it might also give authority to other institutions to pass laws. So for example, the Companies Act is the ultimate legislation when it comes to companies, right? But the CIPC and other various ministries in government have the authority and the mandate to issue out what are called the company regulations, which you have to follow, but they are emanating from the authority of the Companies Act. So the primary legislation becomes the Companies Act, and the company regulation becomes the delegated legislation for the specific institution. So if you go to your own municipality, they will have their own bylaws. Those bylaws are coming from the Municipality Act, are coming from the legislation of that specific of that specific country, right? So examples of legislation and how they affect our businesses. So the main legislation that you might know of is the Companies Act. So the Companies Act tells you, how do you create a company? What are the different types of companies that you can create? Can you create a private legal company, a public legal company, a sole trader? There's a name that I'm forgetting now. Forgot us. But you can create different types of companies, a partnership, for example, right? So what type of companies can you create? And then once you create your companies, what type of constitution can your company have, right? What is the relationship between the owners and the directors of the company? What are the obligations of the owners? What are the obligations of the directors? All of those things. How can you close the company if you no longer want it to exist? So those type of things are the type of things that actually that are found within the Companies Act, right? Then after the Companies Act, there are laws that have to do with taxation. You've got the Income Tax Act, Value Added Tax, Customs Duty Act, Dividends Act. All of these have to do with how do you calculate your income as a business and what tax are you supposed to pay as a business? How do you account? How do you register? How do you record? How do you report your incomes and the taxes that you're supposed to pay as a business, right? You can go to for companies like banks or companies that offer products on credit. There's the National Credit Act, the National Payment System Act, the Debt Collectors Act. These ones look at how do you lend money How do you offer payment terms where you're saying person can pay on credit? How do you charge interest? How do you collect your money from the people that owe you the specific money? What are the ethics in debt collection? Are you able to harass and call someone every single minute, or you are only allowed to call someone maybe once a week? So those are the different laws with regards to credit. You can go into insurance. There's the Insurance Act, short-term insurance, long-term insurance, and all of those things. These ones look at the licensing. Who is authorized to license? Who is authorized to sell insurance? Who is authorized to buy insurance? And all of those different things, even issues of financial stability. How much money do you need for you to open an insurance company at the end of the what? At the end of the day, and how are the consumers protected within insurance? Then you can look at employment, right? You've got the Labor Relations Act, basic conditions of employment, employment equity, and all of those different types of laws. Now, when you're looking at these laws, the question now is, how do you relate with your employees? If there is a problem between you and your employees, how do you resolve that? Are your employees are allowed to strike? And if they strike, how do we resolve the strike? What are the rights of your employees? What are the rights of you as the employer? What are the different obligations of these different people? What type of conditions, maybe to do with overtime, maybe to do with uniform, maybe to do with health and safety? What are the working conditions that are allowed within the nation of South Africa? Then you can also look at issues such as discrimination. How do you hire new people in your organization, right? The issues of discrimination and employee equity at the end of the day. All right. And then there are so many other laws that are going to affect how you operate. Insolvency Act is, let's say that your business runs out of money. How do you liquidate your business? How do you pay off the people that you owe the money to? Competition Act is there to protect the consumers. So if your business wants to compete with other business, what is considered fair competition? Can you combine your different business with another business to form one business? Consumer Protection Act, what are the rights of the consumer when they are buying products from you? Protection of personal information, what information is the company allowed to collect from you? And can they sell that information to other people? Right? Can they do those sales calls, prank calls, and all of those sort of things? Then you've got laws to do with copyright, right? If you create a product, can someone else copy your product, right? You're now looking at trademarks, you're now looking at patents, you're now looking at counterfeit goods. So all of those laws are found within legislation, and they clarify all of the different things or all of the different processes pertaining to how businesses should operate. So these two laws, the Constitution and the legislation, these are very, very key and very, very important whenever you have an issue. Now, the third one, judicial precedent. Judicial precedent, now this one for you and me, it's not really easy to deal with. Usually it's used mainly by lawyers. Lawyers are the ones that use judicial precedent most of the time. Us, we need to know the Constitution, we need to know what the legislation says. But if you hire a lawyer, you will notice that they will use a lot of judicial precedent. Now, when you're looking at judicial precedent now, this is a situation whereby if a court or a judge makes a decision on a particular case, right, that decision becomes a law, right? So it means that if another judge tomorrow wants to make a decision on a similar case, he has to follow the decision that was made by the previous judge. So that's what it basically means. So it means that if a constitutional court makes a decision, the decision that it has made, it will be followed by all the other courts, even if there is no actual law that is written about what they decided. But the fact that they've made a decision based on certain facts, if those facts present themselves again, then we have to follow suit. Right. I think that's basically it on this one. But let me give you an example. Right. Let me just give you an example to try to clarify it. So there was this company called SASFIN, right? So SASFIN was offering some loans, loans just like a normal bank, right? They were offering loans. So they offered a loan to BACS. BACS was a company, right? So when you are offering, when you're entering into a contract, there are different laws. So there is a law called the National Credit Act. The National Credit Act is a law that protects individuals when they enter into a contract with financial institutions. It was specifically made for individuals, for you and me. It was not made for companies, right? So when BEX entered into a contract with SASFIN, automatically this contract was not protected by the National Credit Act because BEX was a company and SASFIN was a company, right? So when they entered into this contract, BEX then defaulted. He did not pay back the money that he borrowed. So when he did not pay back the money that he borrowed, right, he then SASFIN then took BEX to court, right, and said, let him be arrested. Let us apply the principle of security. Let us sell his houses so that we can get our money back. But BEX now, when he got at the court, right, he told the court that this agreement that I signed with SASFIN was unfair. It was an unfair loan agreement. Why was it unfair? I have read the National Credit Act, and what they wrote in their contract was unfair, right? And then SASFIN now is saying that no, but you and me are not under the National Credit Act because we are what? Because we are companies. We are not individuals, we are companies. Now, when the judge who ruled on this case, what did he do? He went now into the legal system and looked for a judicial precedent. He then saw a court case that happened sometime back in 2010, right, between NIDO and ABSA, right? So this court case between NIDO and ABSA, right, was almost similar. It was similar to this one, right? But the Constitutional Court ruled that it did not matter whether it was a company, right? But there are certain things that will still be guided by the National Credit Act, which means that even if the agreement is between companies, the National Credit Act can also be applied, right? So guess what? If you go and read the National Credit Act, it does not talk about companies even until to this day. But this court case now, SASFIN lost the case and the BACS won the case because the judge said, look, what BACS is saying is correct. Although he is a company and the National Credit Act does not apply to companies, but according to the Constitutional Court ruling of 2010, we can still apply the National Credit Act to this transaction. Therefore, the loan agreement is null and void because it was unfair to BEX. So that is how BEX ended up winning the case. So that's an example of a judicial precedent, right? Let's look at common law as a source of law. So when you're looking at common law is it's something that came out of colonialization. So South Africa, right? When the English people came, and when the Dutch people came through into South Africa, they came through with their own laws, right? So you will notice that the English law, they had a lot that they knew about insurance, evidence, negotiable instruments that we did not have in South Africa. So we then adopted that particular type of law. The Dutch, they had contract law that we did not have here in South Africa. So we adopted that part of law. So common law then, it's legislation that we make use of, but that is not really written down. Is we are going back into history and say, in history, how did we, it's just like a judicial precedent, but we are just saying in history, how did we deal with this specific issue, right? But common law is tricky. You cannot apply common law where you have judicial precedent, where you have the constitution, and where you have got legislation. As long as there is something written in legislation, in constitution, and in judicial precedent, you cannot apply common law. But if you can't find anything in all of those things, then you can come back and apply the common law. So common law should always be within the spirit of the constitution, i.e. it should adhere to the current rules and regulations of the country. Right. So I'm gonna give you another example of common law so that you can see how it is applied. So there is a court case that happened in 2017 between Investec and Elandsport, right? I'm just, there were a lot of other people involved, but Investec and Elandsport, right? So in this particular court case, right, these guys from Elandsport, they had a mortgage, right, that they had, right? And this mortgage that they had, they needed to pay it to Investec, but they did not pay the mortgage. So Investec then sued them in a court of law and say, look, we're going to take away the property because you did not pay the what? The loan facility, and we're going to charge you for some damages or whatever, right? So now these guys at Elandsport then highlighted, look, if we read the mortgage paperwork that you guys gave us, it is unclear. It is difficult to interpret. So therefore, because it is unclear and difficult to interpret, according to law, any contract that is ambiguous should be ruled in favor of the defendant, right? Of the person who is the lesser party. So it means that in this particular case, these people that had borrowed the money, it should have been ruled in their favor because the contract was ambiguous, right? Or was not clear on certain things. Now, when the High Court ruled on this case, according to legislation, according to constitution, all of those things, there was nothing that they could find that could help Investec in this particular situation. But however, if you go through common law, there is what is called the common law principle of contract interpretation, which states that whenever you are interpreting a contract, you should consider the intention of the parties when they entered into a contract. Right. You're saying that when you guys entered into the contract, what was really your intention? So the intention was, you guys, we are going to give you money and you guys are going to pay us back the money. That was the intention of the contract. The fact that it was unclear and all of those things does not mean that the contract does not stand. It just means that we have to renegotiate maybe on the terms of the contract, but the contract is still valid because the intentions of the contract, both of us understood it. So that is the principle of interpretation. So they use that common law, despite there not being legislation, despite there not being a constitution that affected this decision, they could use the common law principle of contract interpretation to solve this particular situation. Right. So they ruled in favor of Investec, by the way. They ruled in favor of Investec that Investec should get its money back, right? So that's a common law. Let's look at customs and contract law. So when you're looking at customs, you're looking at a specific community which might have its own customs that it operates with. So if, as long as those customs have been established, that definite, everyone in the community understands those customs, they can be used in a court of law, as long as they do not violate the spirit of the Constitution, right? And then it's the same thing with customary law. So customary law relates to laws of a specific ethnicity, right? Customary law is for a specific ethnicity. You cannot apply Zulu customary law if you are not Zulu. You cannot apply Xhosa customary law if you are not Xhosa. Right. So customary law relates to, that's why there's customs and then there's customary law. Right. So again, customary law is the same principle. It only applies as long as it is within the spirit of the Constitution. It's just like common law. In fact, customs and customary law actually fall under common law. Right? They all fall under common law. They are only applicable if they are within the spirit of the Constitution of the land. So again, let me try to give you an example of a situation that happened. So there was this particular case between Shilubana and Noamita, right? So in this particular situation, it was the issue, this issues of chieftainship, whereby someone says that I am the chief, someone also says I am the chief, and then they had to make a ruling in terms of, so who is in charge of the monies, of the resources of that particular community, right? So in order for them to rule in this particular case, they did not have the constitution, they did not have legislation, they did not have judicial precedent that they could use to rule for this particular case. So what they could only use was the customary law of that particular land, whether to look in this particular community, how do they select a headman? How do they select a leader? and what is the role of the leader within this particular situation. So you might find it might not really relate to business issues, but let's say maybe as a bank, maybe you want to offer mortgages to that community, and you want the leader of the community to sign it off because maybe the land is owned by the community or something like that. So that's something that can affect you as a what? As a business. Then lastly, there is a foreign law, right? Foreign law, this is basically law that is not South African, right? Whether it's from Botswana, from England, from USA, or whatever. But this law, usually, we don't really consider it as part of the law, but we say that it can help a judge to make an informed decision whenever they have a dispute, right? So maybe an example, there is a case back then, Lube and Cap Public Limited. So there was a miner who was working in a mine who got sick. Asbestos in those days when people were still mining asbestos, right? So he brought the case to the court and said, look, I worked for this company. They did not provide me with protection. They did not warn me about the health risk associated with what? With asbestos, right? So I want damages, right? But now, according to South African law, there was not really any specific law, rule, regulation, constitution, and whatnot that could clearly provide the judge with how to proceed. He could see that, yeah, the person has been wronged, but under what law do we charge this British company, right? So because he could not do that, he then went to the law of Britain, to English courts, and used rulings that were done in England, right? Different rulings that were done in England of similar cases. And then he brought those cases now home to say, according to these court cases that were done in Britain, this is how that person was compensated for the injuries that he sustained. So I am now going to compensate what this person are also according to the same compensation that they got in those particular court cases. So that's what that's a foreign law, right? So I think we are done with sources of law. I think we are done with the sources of law. So now we just want to say maybe a few conclusions before we close for the day, right? So, okay, my apology. Okay, there we go. So our key conclusions for the matter, right? So what is the law and why is the law important in South Africa? So number one, the law provides us the minimum standards of operation. You want to start a business, you want to employ people, you want to enter into a contract, this is what you need to do. That's what the law does. Number two, the law gives us property. It tells you that this is your property, i.e. it gives us ownership of our ideas, ownership of our resources, ownership of our performance, so that no one can take away what belongs to us. The law ensures that if there are any agreements that have been done between us and other third parties, those agreements are upheld, which means it makes business possible. Because if it was not possible, you enter into an agreement with an insurance company, they'll tell you they're not going to pay. But because you know that there is law, they will pay, right? The law actually creates companies. Companies did not exist before the law. It creates the separate legal entity that allows you to go and sue a company and allows the company to sue you and allows the company to make certain decisions within an economy. The law also provides for government intervention. Without the law, the government has no right to intervene within an economy. But because of the law, the government can intervene and protect the different consumers that are within an economy. Then lastly, the law provides authority in dispute resolution. If you have a disagreement with someone, the law provides finality in terms of the resolutions that can occur at the end of the day. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of unit number 1, when we were talking about the introduction to business law. So in our next week, we are going to be looking at the law of contract. In our next week, we're going to introduce the law of contract. That is what we are going to focus our energy on. I hope you have a pleasant evening. Good night.